afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Hopefully, everyone can hear me. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first event as we create the Economic Club of the Brownsville Borderplex. And I appreciate your taking the time to join us this afternoon. And I'm very excited to listen to our keynote speaker, Mayor Martinez, in a few minutes. Before we get started, as food is being served, I'd like to welcome some of our elected officials and special guests. First off, of course, we have with us today Mayor Tony Martinez. City Commissioner from District 3, Commissioner Melissa Zamora. Commissioner of District 4, Commissioner John Villarreal. Our County Treasurer, David Betancourt. And always a special friend of ours, Mexican Consul Rodolfo Lantan. If we have left anyone out, we will make sure we recognize you at our next event. And so, once again, we appreciate you being here today. We'll return in about 15 minutes to start the program. Please enjoy your food, and we look forward to a very good presentation from our mayor. So thank you. Once again, I'd like to welcome you to our first Economic Club of the Brownsville Borderplex event. Before we get started, on your tables you do have some forums. If you have a question you'd like to ask the mayor, ask you that you fill those out. If you have not done so, do it now. And then Gilbert and Janie and Adriana from our staff will walk around and collect those. And if we have time after the mayor's presentation, we will try to ask some of these questions. When you have a chance, you guys can walk through and pick up the questions. Once again, I'd like to welcome you to our event. And also, Martin Arambara, the commissioner from the port, has finally showed up. So I promised I wouldn't recognize you till the next meeting, but you're here. So, Martin, thank you for joining us. What is the Economic Club of the Brownsville Borderplex? For more than 100 years in cities and regions throughout the United States, business leaders gather to meet at economic clubs formed as nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations committed to the discussion and debate of important business, government, and social issues. These economic clubs provide a public forum where distinguished international leaders and business leaders provide intelligent and timely discussions on regional, national, and international economic matters, as well as their interaction with the social and political environment. And many times, major policy speeches are made at clubs throughout the country. Today in Brownsville, as we move forward and take a leadership role in South Texas, we are taking a page from New York, Chicago, Detroit, Atlanta, and other great cities as we are forming the Economic Club of the Brownsville Borderplex. Though the Brownsville Economic Development Council is taking the lead today, it is our hope that this economic club will take on its own life, where that on a quarterly basis we will be able to gather, to listen, and to pose thoughtful questions to distinguished speakers and host passionate discussion affecting our community, our region, our state, our nation, and the world today. Like other economic clubs, we are working to be designated as a nonprofit 501c3 charitable organization where the contributions will be used to cover speaker fees as we move forward. Planning for the months ahead, we have already lined up speakers for future luncheons, such as Henry Cisneros, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, as he will share San Antonio's story and discuss vision and planning. Also, we have Fred Keller, Chairman and CEO of Cascade Engineering, as he will discuss how we can more effectively engage industry in workforce development. And then we have James Nevels, who is the non-executive chairman of the board of the Hershey Company, and he will talk about leadership. If you are interested in helping us to make the Economic Club of Brownsville Borderplex the premier forum for public discussion in South Texas, where leaders will want to come to Brownsville to share their information, insight, and exchange of commentary with our business and community leadership, then I ask you to talk to me after the event. We love to have your help and your participation as we move forward. As we create history in Brownsville today, I cannot think of a better individual to be our first keynote speaker, our own Mayor, Tony Martinez. You have his bio on your table. Everyone knows Tony, so I think it's best if we get right to the meat of our event today. And I'd like to have you join me in welcoming our speaker, Mayor Tony Martinez.
I want to, first of all, you didn't know, dear friend of mine, please stand up and be recognized. I'm going to, I was going to share some stories with you, and I don't know that I've always known what a keynote speaker is, but I've heard a few of them. So I think it was best described by Thomas Friedman that I listened to when I was in Washington, D.C., and he says it's sort of like being a rock star. He says the only thing different, Tony, he says, is they get room keys, you get business cards. So anyway, it's a special honor and a privilege for me to be with all of you today. I want to take time out to thank the Brownsville Economic Development Council, as well as the Greater Brownsville Incentive Corporation, for organizing the first Economic Club of Brownsville Borderplex. More importantly, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out to be here. Quite frankly, when Jason asked me about the situation, I said, you know, we've got so many other different organizations, so many other different efforts going on. I said, do you think anybody will really show up? And obviously, he knew what he was doing. I think we're all here to see how we can see a better Brownsville, a city that's known for its wonderful history, its beautiful resacas, and all for the great things that it has accomplished in the past. But more importantly, I think we're all here to find out what we can do in the future. And it starts with each and every one of you. You know, Jason mentioned what is an economic club, and he talks about policy and he talks about vision. And so I asked myself, says, you know, why are we all here today? And I know why I'm here, and I hope that you share my vision, is that I want to see a super Brownsville. We want to realize what Brownsville can be. In looking at what is a keynote address, I looked it up in Webster's dictionary, and it says, an address designed to present the issues of primary interest to an assembly and often to arouse units of enthusiasm. So I said, how do I go about doing this? And I thought, well, you know, I've had the pleasure and the honor of serving as your mayor for almost 10 months now. And I've had the ability and the good fortune to listen to some wonderful people around not only Brownsville, but around the United States. And the three people I'm going to focus on today is Thomas Friedman, Ray Hunt, and although I didn't get a chance to visit in person before he passed away, Steve Jobs, Walter Isaacson, wrote a beautiful book, and was able to visit with him on many different occasions prior to his passing away. And I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of insight of how I think that kind of dovetails with what we're here about today. And I was reminded when I first became a lawyer, I asked my mentor, I said, how long should I take in doing my opening statement or my closing statement? I can't even remember. And if you recall, when I was a young lawyer, there were still miniskirts. And people were wearing miniskirts. And so he says, make it long enough to cover the subject and short enough to make it interesting. So let's hope we can do that. I think in order to succeed, I'm going to bring out those three people because they have some points of interest that I think we can interweave with what we're about to say. I think probably the most important thing that I've seen as I have studied and visited with my city employees and city commissioners and various other organizations is we need a lot of communication. I think that most of us, when I go out and visit, a lot of times we all don't know what one side is doing and the other side is not doing. And so I think I'm going to focus in on communication. We must integrate the entities and work as one, that being the city, the BEDC, the Chamber of Commerce, the Port, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and all of those who have a task of fostering growth in the city. Our goal for this particular endeavor is to create wealth for our community. We will accomplish wealth by communicating at all levels of government as well as the private sector. We continue on this path and Brownsville will grow in the right direction and will prosper economically, socially, and culturally. How do we get there? The theme of my song, as I told the cameras this morning, was the House of Brownsville. We are building the House of Brownsville with a solid foundation, and the foundation starts with communication. All united with one goal in mind, growing our city. The foundation is what supports the house. It is a good and deep foundation, then the house will stand. Without communication, our foundation will falter. Our foundation will crack, our foundation will deteriorate, and our foundation will not support Brownsville. I've spent most of my time truly learning Brownsville, its people, what makes the city click, and with the power of truly understanding this city and our people, I now begun to organize the city's priorities. Our project that is of extreme importance to me, and I think to our city, is the revitalization of downtown, a focal point of the house. We are in the process of infusing life and positive activity in downtown with three simple elements: a vision, communication, and a public and private collaboration. We must make our downtown more appealing, more inviting, not only for our people here in Brownsville, but for tourists, business people, and visitors. Downtown needs to be the welcome mat for Brownsville. It's time to get this plan into action. We have to quit talking and let's start communicating and strategically working to vitalize downtown. For all of you to know is that we do have a group of people that meet every Wednesday at the Cueto Building, which includes the PUB, the Brownsville Economic Development Council, architects, engineers, the Historical Association, and we are actively looking into how we get the downtown revitalization started. We've had about 3 meetings, and yesterday we had the good fortune, I think, Jason, for the first time of going to the City Hall itself and taking a look at some things that not even anybody had ever seen, the Remington collection that was donated to us by the Edelstein family. And so it brought a little bit of life to all of us and said, you know, there's so many things that we can showcase in Brownsville, and we just have to do it, period. That's all. In talking about the 3 people that I have listened to or have read about for the last several months, I try to look at the things that were the common thread behind each one of the people that I think a lot of. Thomas Friedman, as you know, has written various books, but the latest that he has out in the market is What We Used to Be, and he co-authored with another fellow, and I'm not sure if anybody's read it, but he was the keynote speaker at the Mayor's Conference in Washington, D.C. But he had 5 points to make to each and every one of us, and he talked about exactly what this economic club is all about. It's a nonpartisan. When you're a mayor, you're not a Democrat, you're not a Republican, you're not an independent. You're for the people of Brownsville, and it was abundantly clear to us that the subject that we were talking about was the House of Brownsville. Thomas Friedman says in his book, there's 5 things that you have to know. The first thing is that average is over. You can no longer be average. You have to find your extra, and I'll share with you what the extra is. You have to substitute 3 C's for 3 R's. There's no more writing, reading, and arithmetic. It's creative, collaborate, and communicate. Those are the 3 C's that you have to implement in your House of Brownsville. He says there's 3 things you should do. He says you should think like an immigrant. Be hungry. He says, people that are immigrants, and we're going to be immigrants in a new world because of all the technology that's going around us. So you've got to stay hungry. An immigrant figures out how he's going to make it in a world that is brand new to him. So you have to think like an immigrant and be hungry. He says you have to think like an artisan. He says back in the old days, everybody would craft the chairs, the tables that you sat on, and you would put your initials on that particular piece of furniture because you were proud of what you did. So you have to take pride in what you do. And then he says you have to think like a waiter or a waitress. And that was sort of curious to me because he says, I was in the pancake house in his hometown, I think Wisconsin, somewhere in a small city. And he says, we were ordering pancakes, and I says, I was with a friend. And he said, I ordered pancakes and eggs. And he says, my friend ordered pancakes and fruit. And so when the waitress came out, she said to my friend, she says, I gave you some extra fruit. And he goes, that lady is an entrepreneur. She did a little extra. That was her extra. And even though it may sound kind of crazy, but he says, you know what? We doubled her tip because of that extra. He said, what that lady had, what did she control? She controlled the fruit ladle. She knew how to put that extra, and so it might be, your extra might be in being an engineer or being a banker or whatever it is, but you got to give that extra. And so I said, well, that all makes a lot of sense. Does anybody really echo all these sentiments? And so some of you, I look around the room, we're fortunate enough to listen to Mr. Ray Hunt, who also had 5 different points. And it was interesting because I took the notes that particular day just because I was interested in how that would compare with what Thomas Friedman had to say. But Ray Hunt had these 5 points to say. He says you have to have a strong corporate culture. And so he says you can't just be like everyone else, and you can't just say, I just want to get in the game. He says, no, you have to have a strong corporate, you have to have the same values, you have to have the same work ethic, because you know that a team that you have, success is going to beget success. He says you have to have the ability to differentiate oneself. And so he says you can't, if you expect average, you're going to get average results. That's the best you'll ever do. And so when you compare that with what Thomas Friedman says, he says average is over. He says the third thing that Mr. Hunt told us was you have to be adaptable. Adaptability, you have to go with the change, you have to move. You have to know that it's not going to be the strongest. It's Darwin's theory of evolution. It's not the strongest, it's not the most intelligent, it's not the biggest. It's the guy who can adapt the quickest that survives. And then he says you have to be agile. And I think I've expounded this particular theory with some of you. And I say, we have to probably think small in a way that you can be agile in these economic times. And then he says the last thing, which is I think Carlos and I were speaking about last night, the willingness to be a contrarian when appropriate. In other words, you have to kind of think outside the box. You have to know that there is something out there. And it was really intuitive and really enlightening and really appreciated from my point of view, because when Ray Hunt spoke, he spoke about Brownsville. And he said, I want to invest in Brownsville. I want to be in Brownsville. And for some of you who I spoke with this morning, I was at a meeting and I said, I got a letter FedEx to me from Mr. Ray Hunt this morning, and it is simply gorgeous. He says, the beauty of your house was only exceeded by the warmth of your, of the hospitality that you showed. And it really wasn't something that I set out to do. It was just a very natural thing, because this fella is really extending his hand out to Brownsville and to all of you. And I dare say that we need to take advantage of that. And then I say Steve Jobs it's a big book, but there's only 2 points that I thought were applicable. There was many points that he made, but the 2 points that I think that we need to listen to and really dwell on is, he says, the way that I do things, and of course if you all know anything about Steve Jobs, he wasn't exactly the most pleasant guy in the world, but he's probably the most innovative guy in the world. I mean, when you talk about the iPad and the iPhone and everything else that he thought about, because he wanted to kind of own you. He wanted to figure out what you needed, and he wanted to know ahead of time what you wanted, so he would have it on the market for you, so that by the time it came out, you needed to have it as part of whatever it is that you are. But he said there's 2 words that have dictated my life, and he goes, focus and discipline. And so as we go along with the House of Brownsville, I say, we got to focus on what we have. We got to get ourselves disciplined to do and to achieve what we know we can do. So as I went through there, I said, the city has been growing by leaps and bounds, and it now has, first of all, a certified shovel-ready industrial park. The 73-acre park certification is close to the Port of Brownsville. A new SH 550 loop makes the park attractive for prospective companies. So I said, that's one thing that we have to dwell upon, the industrial aspect of it. What companies have we had that have come in? Well, I think Jason mentioned to you an engineering group that is part of CK Technologies. They believed in Brownsville. This Ohio-based company has invested millions of dollars in the community. And I think probably just last week, he says, I want to be more involved. I want to be part of Brownsville. I want to see how I can help and believe in Brownsville. So CK Industries is a part of where we're headed. Pronto Insurance, which is locally owned, is another example of Brownsville believing in Brownsville. This company, it's Brownsville-based, has expanded to more than 100 locations around the state. It's made the list of Forbes magazine recently released top 20 franchises for the buck. They have made Brownsville its headquarters, and their plans are to become the #1 choice for insurance in the state of Texas. So all that being said, that's Brownsville believing in Brownsville. Now imagine if we could communicate that through the House of Brownsville. We have Mexican companies in the United States, and has an incubator at the ITEC. It's called a GC Telecom. It offers an alternative to wireless customers who need help fixing their broken equipment. They went into business in Monterey about 16 years ago. They have grown into an extremely successful venture with more than 600 employees at 24 repair labs throughout Latin America. The company is certified by all major cell phone manufacturers like LG and Motorola, and they also serve all the Bose sound systems. They're planning to take their U.S. market from Brownsville throughout the United States. The House of Brownsville will be ground zero for communicating our vision. So all that being said, I said, these are all wonderful things that make things happen, and so we're going to build the House of Brownsville. But as I was preparing for the speech, I happened to be watching 60 Minutes, and I don't know who watched 60 Minutes. I'm an avid 60-minute fan. But I watched a fella, and I wanted to share this in case you didn't see it, because there's a fella named Sergio Marcioni, an Italian, who is the head of the Fiat company in Italy. And actually, he's the one that took over Chrysler. And so you kind of wonder, says, what is it that when you look at all these ideas and how do you implement and what does make above average? Why is average over? And how do you have that work ethic? And how do you really implement that? And I think there's probably the old-fashioned way. This gentleman took over Chrysler. Chrysler, was at the bottom. They're about getting ready to lose 300,000 jobs on the plant itself. What has this guy done over the last 18 months? Well, last year they reported $183 million profit. He paid back the government $6 billion 6 years ahead of time, a $6 billion debt that was accruing interest at 19.5%. So that's, they were asking, says, Sergio, what did you see? He says, I remember when I came here in 2009, there's nothing worse for a leader than to see fear in people's faces. It's been a long, rocky road, but the fear is gone. What are they afraid of? Of not being here. All right, it's that simple. This is really a question of existence. There's nothing worse in life than to sit there and be a victim of a process that is outside your control. So that sort of summed it up for me. How do you go about? And he says, what? We didn't. He says, I love the American worker. He says, but it was really quick to see what was going on. He says, like most Detroit automakers, Chrysler was saddled with stifling bureaucracy, which we quickly culled. To change the management structure, he combed through the company and found 26 young leaders who would report directly to him. And the questioner says, were they on a management fast track? He says, no, some of the people were buried inside an incredibly hierarchical organization that all pointed to the top. This place was run by a chairman's office. And he says, that was the tower. He says, the chairman's office is the top floor. It's empty now. We use it as a tourist trap. We bring people up there. Why did you leave? He says, because nothing happens there. I'm on the floor here with the engineers. So I said, what? That's exactly what all of us have to do. You have to go to the House of Brownsville, go to the foundation. Let's control our future from the ground up. So what do we learn? Average is over. Find your extra. Adapt. Be agile. And as I said from the very beginning, the most important part is to communicate at all levels, government, public sector, with one goal in mind: economic wealth for the Brownsville Borderplex. And the last thing, I think I was listening also, since it's March Madness, listening to Magic Johnson, and he says, basketball is like life. You win, you lose, but you never quit. Thank you.
Mayor Martinez, thank you very much for your words. We appreciate you being our keynote speaker today. And we do have a few minutes for a couple questions, if you don't mind, Mayor. So I'll ask a few. First off, I think it's very appropriate, given what you just spoke about. Why should we invest in downtown?
Downtown is actually your welcome mat. I can't tell you, I was at the college this morning visiting with some other folks about another matter, and we were talking about how beautiful your campus is, and the rest of the UTB campus. It's a pleasure to walk through there. If you've walked our streets of downtown, you realize that's probably not the, where you'd like to spend a whole lot of time. So our purpose right downtown is, first of all, one of the things that this group will tell you that's been working with us for the last 3 weeks is that we'd like to fix up, downtown has a city hall where it's the oldest city hall in the state of Texas and perhaps maybe the nation that's been in existence and been used for city purposes. And so historically, it's a good thing to do. We see a lot of people down there that are, you can go walk down there right now and you can see a lot of people looking at our old buildings and saying, you know, history will teach us a lot. History will tell us what we're about. And so I'd like the downtown to tell the story of Brownsville. It's got a beautiful story to tell.
Second question is, have you invited President Obama or Mrs. Obama to visit our city before the elections?
Yeah, I have, but I doubt seriously that they will be having a chance to come this way. Not for any other reason. I did happen to be in Washington and visiting with the president about 2 weeks ago, and he asked me about Brownsville. Carlos was there with me. And he said that although he couldn't make it before the election, he was definitely going to come after the election. So I guess he's presuming he's going to win.
The next question is the city thinking of lowering the impact fees?
Is that a developer? No. Sorry, Bill. Just kidding. You know, the city is taking a look at a lot of issues, okay, that I think are very important. We need to address these issues and probably in a much different way than they were previously. I think my two city commissioners here realized that we were running a much different shop. Melissa had the pleasure of being there before we were there, and John and I kind of started together. We're trying to take a look and make sure everything makes sense. And so, you know, if the first thing I asked was, I want to know what's happened after the impact fees as to how much has been generated, how was it used, is it something that has stifled the growth? I've just finished talking about the growth of Brownsville, the House of Brownsville. I'm dead serious about saying this house is going to be built. And for any of us that if you know in my schedule, Sandra sits back there and smiles at me. My poor Sandra, she's been watching my calendar for the last 10 months. We're going after it morning, noon, and night to get this thing off the ground. So we'll take a look at it.
Mayor, in order to finish on time, that's our last question. So once again, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. And we thank you for joining us as well. And we will have our next event in the summer where it will be former Secretary of Housing, Henry Cisneros. So thank you once again for joining us. Have a good day.